All right, hey everybody, this is Dean with Seed St. Louis. Today we are going to talk about potatoes. So if you have not grown potatoes before, they're very easy to grow as long as you make sure you do a couple things. So they are a spring crop here in St. Louis. Sometimes people grow them in the fall, but they're a little more tricky, partially because it's hard to find seed potatoes, which is what we'll talk about. And so for the spring, you're going to plant them usually around mid-March, but you can plant them anytime from mid-March through mid-April. But generally, the earlier you get them in, the better, just because they have a longer season to grow when it's cooler, which is the temperature they like before it gets really hot. And then you will usually harvest them around usually sometime in July. Is generally when they will be ready, depending on the variety and whether you planted it at the earlier or the later part of the planting window. So one of the most important things you need for potatoes is you are going to need a nice deep soil. So if your soil is really, really compacted, it's going to be hard to grow a lot of potatoes because it's going to be hard for those tubers to push through that really compacted soil. But if you're growing in a raised bed, which is what a lot of people do, your soil is kind of naturally relatively loose because all that soil was brought in. So in a raised bed, you usually won't need to worry about it. But if you're in an in-ground situation, you are going to want to make sure that you loosen up that soil pretty deep. Broad forks work really well for this, or just a digging fork, or even just a shovel, just to kind of get down deep into the soil, kind of lean back, break up that compaction. The other most vital thing you're going to need is potatoes. So you can just plant like potatoes from the grocery store or potatoes that you saved yourself, but there is a risk that those will have disease in them. And when potatoes get disease, it pretty much kind of just, the yields are very, very low in that instance. And once that disease is then in your soil, it stays there for quite a few years. So it makes it difficult for you to grow more potatoes going into the future. Also, sometimes potatoes, if they were from the store, have been sprayed with chemical compounds that slow the sprouting. And so you get much slower growth or just not growth, and they might just rot in your soil. So if you are able to, what we most recommend is to buy seed potatoes. We sell these ourselves, but you can also get them at a lot of hardware stores, farm and home stores, places like that, and of course online. A seed potato just looks like a potato. It's just a potato that was grown in a situation that they know was disease-free, and it was certified as disease-free. So you know that you are not going to be introducing diseases to your soil, and that you should get a pretty good harvest from them. They will come in all sorts of different sizes for potatoes, as you can see from these here. And this is what you're actually planting, is the potato itself. So it's called a seed potato, but you're not planting a seed. You're not, planting some little tiny green part of a potato or anything like that. You are planting the tuber itself. But given that there are various sizes, you can actually cut some of these up into smaller sizes to get more, plants to start with. So for a small potato like this, you're not going to cut this up. This is actually a little bit smaller than you would really want for a potato to stick in the ground, a seed potato. But one on this side that has quite a few eyes on it, which are, most people probably know what potato eyes are, but they're the little kind of indents here. This has, quite a few. And so that's where the leaves and the branches, the stems are going to come from. So this is a good one that you could still stick in the ground. But for larger ones like this, you could stick the whole potato in the ground, but you can also cut it into, 2, 3, maybe even 4 pieces. So from this one potato, you could have, 2 to 4 plants that you could get from it. So the way to know how much to cut it up is by looking at, again, the eyes. So on a potato like this, you can see there's a bunch of eyes clustered on this end, but there's also quite a few eyes here on the sides of the potato. You want to make sure that each piece, when you cut it up, has at least 2 to 3 eyes on it. And so on this one where we've got, 10, 15 eyes, that shouldn't be a problem. The other thing is that you don't want to have a piece that is smaller than about 2 inches by 2 inches roughly. So this one is like 2 by 2 by like 1. So again, it's a little small, but you wouldn't want anything smaller than this as we're cutting it up. And so you are, really just cutting it up. So we're going to cut here, probably about halfway. And then this one, let's see, 1, 2, 3, yeah. So there's not as many eyes on this side, so that would be one. But then this one, we could maybe even cut in half again. Get our counter nice and dirty. And then you can see on these pieces here, so I cut this one. It's a nice good size, but you can see there's 1, 2 eyes, 3 eyes there. So again, that's about as small as you'd want to go. This one you can see is much larger, but it still only has about 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 eyes on there. So then once you have them cut, because they are very fresh and wet, it's usually best to let them sit out for at least a day or two. And you'll want to put them so that they're kind of cut side up, like you don't want this down on something because you want it to dry. So you're going to let this kind of sit out just somewhere that it has airflow. And these will callus over, it's called, so it will dry. You'll get kind of like a white, crusty, almost looking material on it sometimes. And what that does by allowing that to dry up and kind of scab over is it means that when you stick it in the ground, there's a lower chance of getting a fungal infection or of them rotting. So you get a higher chance of success, which is what we want. And that is all there is to it, to cutting the potatoes. So after we let these sit out for a day or two, we will come back and we will show you how to actually plant them in the ground. Okay, so it's been a couple days since we cut up the potatoes, and now we're going to show you how to plant potatoes. So we've got our bed here. Normally we would clear the whole thing if we were planting the whole thing, but we're just going to plant a little bit here on the end to show you. So for potatoes, you're going to plant them pretty deep. Usually seeds, we're talking about like a 1/2 inch or, maybe, or like at most really. I mean, like pretty small depth. Potatoes, we're going to be planting them like 6 inches at least deep. Sometimes you can plant them even deeper, depending on kind of how you do the trench. But we're going to dig a trench about 6 inches deep. We've got this nifty little kind of trench digging hoe, but you can use any tool you want. So yeah, we're just going to dig a little trench here. Just kind of pushing the soil off to the sides because we're going to need that. So you can see it's, pretty deep, a lot deeper than planting seeds, obviously. All right. Then all we do is we take our potatoes. If it's one that has been cut in particular, but really any of them, I guess, you want the eyes to be pointing up. So like, you don't want to stick it in like this. You want to stick it in like this if it's cut. Or if it's a whole potato, just kind of like this, there's like 3 eyes kind of all together. There's a couple other eyes, but where there's kind of those 3 eyes, we'll kind of do the same. The spacing actually depends a little bit, it varies a little bit from cultivar to cultivar of potatoes, but it's usually about 6 to 9 inches, depending on what type of potato you're planting. So just check. Whenever you know what potato you're planting, what spacing you do, and you just stick them in. So these are 6 inches. All right. And then we just fill the trench back in. So sometimes, especially if you're digging a deeper trench than 6 inches, sometimes people will tell you only like fill it halfway, and then as they grow, you can continue to fill it in. But when we're talking about a trench this depth, you can really just kind of push it all back in. And that'll be fine, especially with this pretty light soil we're working with. All right. And then normally when you're planting, you would then also, just like with anything else when you're planting it, you would then want to give it a good water. We cannot do that right now because our water is still turned off because we're recording this ahead of time so that you have it. You would normally want to plant your potatoes in St. Louis around mid-March, but you can plant them from mid-March kind of through mid-April. We are before that, so our water is still turned off. But when you are planting them in mid-March, you want to then give them just a nice good watering. And then once they start growing, you treat them just kind of like any other plant. You can kind of, as they're growing, hill your potatoes, but that's something that we can show some other time.